So thank you so much to all of you for coming in and joining us this evening for this panel session to discuss our Status of Young Women in Scotland report, which was released on the 8th of July. So just 2 weeks ago today that was released. I'm delighted to have with me today Patrycja Kupiec, who is the CEO of YWCA Scotland. We've got Rhianna Mallia, who is our research coordinator, and we've got Sorcha McLaughlin, who's one of our research volunteers. And I am Elena, I'm the National Programmes Coordinator for YWCA Scotland, but as part of my many things being covered role, helped out with the Status of Young Women in Scotland report this year. So to give you kind of a rundown of how this is going to work, we're going to go through kind of the report, how the report was done, how the research was conducted, each individual chapters, some key kind of stats and highlights from those, our commitments to the report, and then we'll have space for questions at the end. So I'm going to pass over now to Patrycja, who's going to give you an introduction to the Status of Young Women in Scotland. Patrycja.
You all hear me fine? Can you just give me thumbs up? Great. So yeah, this is our 5th Status of Young Women in Scotland. So we've been doing this annual research since 2015, and it really offers young women in Scotland an opportunity to make their voices heard on issues that are important to them, but also to influence decision makers. And due to the impact of pandemic, this year we thought it would be most appropriate for this research to actually span 2 years. So it started in 2020 and it also covered 2021. So it's this period of time during which our lives really changed beyond recognition. And we knew from the very beginning of planning of this research that there was one area beyond all others that we really needed to investigate, especially in the context of this global pandemic. And it was employment and young women's experiences of employment. So we all know that these past 15 months have brought many challenges, and young women were disproportionately affected economically by COVID-19 pandemic, which just really brought to the surface, all of pre-existing inequalities in the labor market. So these were even more emphasized. And these included struggling financially before and during the crisis, taking on additional debt, being more likely to be on 0-hour contracts and insecure work, unaffordable childcare, and also closure of childcare provisions. So just to give you some of the key stats before we go through all of the areas that we've researched for this report, 1 in 12 young women told us that they were made redundant as a result of the pandemic. 40% did not feel secure in the current employment, and 60% had to change their career plans. Over 50% young women that spoke to us felt very or extremely stressed or anxious about applying for new jobs. So but also this crisis demonstrated that there are alternative ways of working. A lot of us have been working from home. A lot of us have been asking for flexible work and working from home previously and were rejected. So this is really demonstrating that there are different ways to achieve better work-life balance that fits different lifestyles, different level of caring responsibilities, and creates a much healthier, more balanced way of working. The Scottish government has pledged to support companies to pilot 4-day working week. We've just moved to that way of working earlier this month. And it's really important for us to support other organizations to transition to this way of working if they want to. And throughout this report, throughout all of the sections and all of the topics that we've researched, young women told us really clearly that flexible working is key to making them feeling more supported at work, whether it's in terms of flexible hours or opportunities to work from home to fit with lifestyles, health needs, and caring responsibilities. So this is really an underlying thread that will go through all of the issues and all of the areas that we'll be discussing today. But what really young women want to see in Scotland is to see equal pay, equal educational opportunities, and equality within the workplace. Young women want to feel safe from harassment when they go to their work. Finally, many young women mentioned improvement of working conditions. So better maternity leave pay, increased childcare support, improved healthcare, the removal of unpaid internships and 0-hour contracts, and increased pay across the board. And we believe that Scotland can achieve all of this. And we hope you will support us and young women who shared their stories with us to make this vision a reality. So we will ask you at the end to tell us about, in chat, so don't worry, you don't have to speak on the camera. It can be totally anonymous, but to think and tell us what your commitments to creating change are going to be. And it can be personal as a young woman. It might be, I'll be asking for pay rise. I'll be asking for more transparent information about pay scales in my organization. It could be creating a health and well-being group in your workplace. It can be talking about 4-day week. Just think about it as we are discussing the findings of this report. Think about what your commitment is going to be. And I will also tell you at the end what our organizational commitments are to creating working conditions in Scotland that young women told us that they need and that they deserve. So I will pass you over to Rhianna, who coordinated this research, to tell you a bit more about how we approached it, how we did the research, and how we arrived at the findings that we arrived at.
Thanks, Patrycja. So this report started over coffee last summer. Patrycja and I met to catch up, and we talked about the fact that it was really sad that we didn't have a budget to do Status of Young Women in Scotland for 2020. And we kind of thought, well, we don't need a budget. We're going to do it anyway. And we managed to sort of pull together our different experience of working on it over the past 5 years and do it in-house, which is the first time that has ever sort of been the case. So yeah, we did it on very minimal budget, and we pulled together a team of amazing volunteers, some of whom had worked with us before and some who were new. And yeah, we kind of approached it that way, which was really different. And so Patrycja, Elena and I worked together to sort of come up with a project plan, and then we pulled in the volunteers to think about how we actually were going to carry out this research, how we were going to design it. So it was very participatory in the way that we approached the research this year. It felt really sort of, I don't know, it felt really meaningful the way that we all came together in a time that you know, it was hard to come together, and also just sort of demonstrates how valuable this work is. I think thinking about the deficit of data that there is on young women's experiences in Scotland, especially during the pandemic, was really notable. So we just felt it was like we couldn't not do this research at this time about this really important issue. So it was going to happen when we did, and we made it happen, which I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the team for coming together and doing that. So yeah, we got together and designed a survey. So came up with some questions which have generated the pretty shocking statistics that Patrycja just outlined at the beginning there. That gathered nearly 200 responses over 2 months, which again is quite a lot, considering that people were maybe not as likely to be sort of filling in surveys, and were maybe a bit sort of fatigued of doing online events and being sort of involved in online situations. So yeah, we were really happy with the amount of feedback we got through the survey. And the survey really helped us to do the next part of the research, which was to conduct some group discussions. The information that we were getting back through the survey was telling us that there was really different experiences coming back through from women who had different life situations. So we thought how good an opportunity it would be to really delve deep into those specific issues in the groups. So that sort of led us to thinking about doing 4 different groups with 4 different groups of young women. So instead of sort of general groups of all people with all different experiences, we really wanted to delve deep into different issues. So we spoke to women in one group who had experiences of caring responsibilities. So they were primarily young carers who were looking after relatives. Then we spoke to women from ethnic minority backgrounds about their employment experiences. We spoke to women in precarious work situations. So that's women who have sort of 0 hours contracts or were freelancing. Also some sex workers attended that focus group, which was really, really valuable for the different experiences that we wanted to sort of delve into. And then we also spoke to women with disabilities as well to talk about their employment experiences. So that really helped us to get a nuanced picture of what different issues those kind of groups faced. We then had lots of data to work with. So there was a mixture of obviously quantitative numbers, statistics that were coming through from the survey. And then we had some really, really rich qualitative data too from the groups and from the qualitative responses in the survey. We came together with the volunteers and we used whiteboards online whiteboards and spreadsheets to kind of do some really in-depth data analysis. We had a group sort of analysis session where we pulled apart all the themes and gave our perspectives on the important things that we wanted to draw out in the report. And with that, we had our sort of the main findings, and we thought we had enough then to begin writing. So I'm not going to credit anyone but Patrycja for writing the report. She pulled it together really quickly, amazingly. I've never seen anyone write so quickly. And then I helped edit it. So what you see today is a culmination of all of that work, really. And yeah, we couldn't have done it without the volunteers. So I just want to shout them out right now. Thank you all. And yeah, that's how we approach the research. So I will pass over to whoever's doing chapter 1. Unfortunately, I cannot remember. I don't have the schedule in front of me.
And we're not even going to chapter 1 yet. So we're now handing over to one of our very wonderful volunteers. So we had a team of volunteers. So we had Zoe and Ailey and Joanna and Sorcha, who's here with us this evening. So I'm going to hand over to Sorcha to chat just a bit more about being a status volunteer this year.
Yeah, hello everyone. So I've volunteered with Young Women's Movement on the status report for the last 2 years. But as Rhianna kind of said before, it was a wee bit different this year just with the funding and stuff. So we were asked to do maybe a little bit more than in the past, which I think I can speak for all of us and say that we were all like quite keen to do that, because the report is something that I think we all are quite passionate about and kind of are on board with. So we were all like more than happy to do that. So yeah, just to give a wee bit of information about the kind of things that we were doing. So to start with, the first sort of task we had was around analysing the data from the survey. So as Rhianna said, there was sort of, I think, 6 qualitative responses in the survey. So we had to sort of go through all that and code it and kind of pick out the key themes that were coming up from those. And then we kind of fed that back, and that kind of shaped, I guess, what maybe the questions in the focus groups would look like as well. And then we also kind of helped support with the focus groups as well. So each of us kind of had one focus group that we supported with. So our job was really just to sort of take notes and do sort of transcribe everything that was being discussed, and then kind of write a kind of final like note-taking document as well at the end that kind of just summarised what we thought the kind of key themes were, and also just identifying any good quotes that could be used in the final report as well. And then, yeah, as Rhianna said as well, we all kind of came together at the end as a group to kind of look at everything that came out of the survey and everything that came out of the focus groups, and really looking at, I guess, what we kind of thought the key findings were. And then that sort of fed into what the final report would be, which will obviously sort of go into look at each chapter and what the kind of findings were and things like that. But overall, it was a really great experience to be a volunteer on the project. It was really, I think, especially for me, being part of the focus groups and even the survey, seeing the kind of things that were brought up in the survey, being a young woman myself, you can kind of see your own experiences reflected in other people's as well, which was really nice. So yeah, it was a really good experience, and hopefully I'll do it again as well.
And we've got that recorded, so if you try and back out next year, I'll be sending you that soundbite.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sorcha. Okay, so we're going to move on now to chat a little bit about each of the chapters. If you've got any questions at any point, please do pop those in the chat, and I will kind of collate them to come back to them at the end. But between myself, Rhianna, and Patrycja, we've kind of just split the chapters up, and we're just going to give you essentially like a brief overview of each of the things that we found. So I'm actually going to start. So I'm going to talk to you about chapter 1. So chapter 1 specifically looked at young women, employment, and the impact of the pandemic. So as you've already heard from Patrycja, a number of the young women that we spoke with had the pandemic had affected their employment. So 51% of the young women their employment stability was affected. So 25% were furloughed, 8% were made redundant, and 20% weren't able to find work during the pandemic. So that you can see there, you know, obviously that's the majority of those women that took part in our survey were affected by the pandemic. And I think that's something that we can see reflected in everything that's coming out about what the pandemic has done with employment. We also have 15% of the women felt other impacts due to the pandemic that didn't come into those kind of headings that we had there. So this was things such as taking temporary pay cuts, not being eligible for furlough, freelance work drying up. Obviously, that's something that we've seen a lot in especially creative industries, and we'll kind of come back to chat about that. People being put on very short-term work contracts, and then also the workplaces themselves not being supportive of kind of the additional mental health impacts of the pandemic and kind of the impact that that has had on young women. And again, we'll kind of come back and chat a bit more about that later. Obviously, employment in itself was not all 100% rosy prior to the pandemic. And so there were a few young women who pointed to other factors that had impacted on their employment, that kind of compiled with the pandemic made them quite uncertain about making career changes or, you know, trying to make that change in their work life. And the number one kind of factor that came up there was Brexit. So I think, again, that's something that's not necessarily that surprising. It's not all bad news. So some of the people, yes, there was a change in their employment status, but actually the pandemic gave them an opportunity to kind of refocus and think about opportunities that perhaps they hadn't considered before. A number started businesses, especially within the creative sector. Some decided that now was a time to apply for that progression opportunity. Some people had progression opportunities become available because of increased demand, you know, on their sector, on their organisation. And some young women also decided to essentially prioritise their mental health, which had been kind of already an issue within their workplace, but the pandemic has kind of adversely affected that, and so they decided to leave stressful or toxic workplaces. We also spoke to young women who were able to get new kind of jobs during the pandemic, which kind of brought up a whole new kind of array of issues about starting a new job during the pandemic. But they acknowledged, you know, that they felt very lucky that they'd been able to get on these new jobs, but working from home without knowing their teammates was often quite isolating. And they also kind of mentioned that there was a lack of support and mentoring opportunities because they hadn't, you know, met their people face to face. And, you know, for example, I think we take so much for granted when we work together in a space, the ability to turn to someone and ask for support, or to go for lunch with someone and have that bond with them. It's a lot more difficult to do when everything that you're working on is completely reliant on digital interaction. As Rhianna mentioned, we spoke to young women in focus groups from the kind of areas that we identified as being particularly impacted by the pandemic. So that was young women in precarious work, young women with caring responsibilities, young disabled women, and young ethnic minority women. And the group I'm going to start talking about just briefly is those who were in precarious work. So we spoke to women in kind of various jobs that were either unpredictable or insecure. So looking at 0-hour contracts, kind of minimum wage roles, freelance work, and sex work. And essentially the overarching theme behind all of that was just a lack of stability. So not knowing what their income was going to be, a lack of support, a lack of protection through government schemes, but also from employers. And one of the things that really kind of stuck out to us was actually the complete lack of support for sex workers. And so the sex workers that they spoke to discussed the difficulty of essentially having to choose between their safety, choose between abiding by restrictions and earning a living and being able to pay their rent. And they spoke about that the supposed support schemes that were available for sex workers were actually not, so sorry, that's the government support schemes were not actually fit for purpose, and that the best, you know, support for sex workers during the pandemic was from sex worker-led organisations. And yeah, essentially the government had sort of failed to support them. We also know, and there's been a lot of discussion about how challenging this experience has been for people who work in the creative sector. Obviously, it's been basically decimated by the pandemic, and although things are starting to open up now, I think it's going to be a while until we're really back to normal. So a number of people who worked freelance in the creative sector and were having contracts terminated, weren't able to pick up new contracts. And we spoke to one young woman who, you know, took up other work during it and then quit that when they thought things were going back to normal, kind of at the end of last year. But then obviously when we went into lockdown again, was having to look for other work again. Looking at caring responsibilities, so the majority of the young women folks who were young carers looking after relatives, and they felt that basically the support for young carers essentially stopped during the pandemic, and that a lot of the additional caring responsibilities that came about due to sort of professional care or professional sort of shift-based care stopped. And so the impact was very much felt by the families who had to pick up what the services that they were using were no longer able to provide, and how this impacted their education, it impacted their jobs, and they felt that there was a gap there, that this wasn't something that had been addressed, and they just didn't feel like their unique circumstances were recognised anywhere in the government guidelines. So in things like travel, they also weren't in the sort of vaccine priority list, and that took a while for them to kind of get in to get their vaccines alongside other frontline workers. And then finally, when we talk about kind of the impact of the pandemic, there's a huge, obviously, impact on young disabled women and those that have got long-term conditions, where they spoke essentially about their fear of impacting their health negatively as they continue to work. There not being enough clear guidance around shielding, and then therefore that didn't reflect in what their employer was offering them. And also a lack of PPE equipment for frontline workers. We spoke to young disabled women who did receive COVID and now has long COVID. And this is obviously not a standalone story at all. And while there have been some positives in that, we're all very aware that working from home is now something that's possible, and that will have a beneficial impact for some disabled young people and disabled people in general. It does not work for everyone. Virtual meetings do not work for everyone. Online learning doesn't work for anyone. And this, from our research, sometimes resulted in young women having to leave work or education due to this. So all in all, as I'm sure we're all aware, the pandemic's had a massive impact on employment. And this is just kind of like a snapshot of chapter 1 of what we found. I'm going to pass over to Patrycja now, who's going to talk about chapter 2. And sometimes Patrycja's camera takes a little minute.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
You're back.
Always when I unmute myself, there's a wee bit of a lag. So yeah, we also wanted to explore how well young women feel supported to enter work, and do they feel like they have equal opportunities, and how do they feel supported when they get there? So the support levels in the workplace that exist both in the context of pandemic, but just also generally speaking. So the first key finding was that 33%, so almost half of young women, felt they did not have equal access to work opportunities compared to men, and then people who didn't have the protected characteristics that they've had. So what really came out was the kind of intersectional experiences in terms of inequality in the workplace. So discrimination due to gender, but also age, disability, ethnicity, and class. And all of these factors led to pronounced negative impacts on young women's mental health, especially when they were job seeking, but also made them less likely to apply for progression opportunities, for example. It really brought to the fore imposter syndrome. It made them more unlikely to actually speak about any issues that they are experiencing. And in particular, within that group, what really came out quite strongly was the negative experiences of young women who had caring responsibilities, who told us that part-time work often was their only option, because they had to juggle it with their caring responsibilities, and they had to be really flexible in the ways that they were able to access work. But that meant that they didn't have equal opportunities to apply for promotions or training opportunities as full-time staff. So they were seen as less ambitious, even though the only thing that was holding them back was their caring responsibilities, and they were willing to bring as much as they could to the workplace, but they were passed over for any opportunities. And I just wanted to share a quote from a young woman with you that talks about that. In my workplace, being part-time means I am not in line for promotions and progression. My reasons for working part-time include living with an anxiety disorder and caring responsibilities, both of which affect women disproportionately. And I think many workplaces can create a facade of equality without truly engaging with the reality of what holds women's career progression back. We also wanted to know how supported young women feel when they are in work. And there was really a variety of responses there. I suggested that those experiences really were different across sectors and situations, but some of the key insights that we were able to pull out of the data was that 25% of young women did not feel at all supported to look after their mental health. So that's 1 in 4 young women. More hopefully, 40% felt supported to look after their general well-being, and 44% felt supported or very supported to develop their skills at work. So like as Elena said previously, it's not all doom and gloom, but there are definitely areas for improvement. And mental health support was one of these. Some young women emphasized that the support they received was due to a positive relationship with a manager. However, this not always translated into organization-wide policies. So there could have been 2 young women who worked in the same workplace who would have very different experiences depending on who was line managing them. And a concerning trend that we noticed in conversations with young women in precarious work was that while they're often felt supported by their colleagues and line managers, many of them reported feeling disposable in the way that they were treated by their companies, especially of COVID-19 related pay cuts and redundancies. And as I said, 25% of young women told us that there was no support at all in terms of mental health. And a lot of respondents reported that for them to really feel supported at work is to improve mental health support. So many employers on paper were supportive of mental health issues, but many young women who responded to our survey noted that these behaviors were not modeled by senior staff, and therefore they would feel really reluctant to be booking time off for mental health due to fear of judgment or letting the team down. So technically they knew that this was an option, but they would never feel comfortable actually accessing that. And examples of good mental health support that young women suggested in this research was actually having dedicated mental health days. So not just taking sick leave, but knowing that there are days that you can book just to look after your mental health. Frequent and regular check-ins. One thing that was extremely important is actually senior management taking time off for mental health and openly talking about it to just create this like really open culture of conversation and no shame around mental health, in the same way that people would feel comfortable taking time off for any sort of physical health issues. And also having a work buddy system for more informal conversations around mental health. External support such as access to apps or work counseling and anonymous work counseling. So being able to access it for whatever reason and not feeling like there is a prejudice against that and any stigma that might be associated with that. 1 in 3 respondents felt unsupported to look after their general well-being. And this was definitely exacerbated by the pandemic. So there was this pressure to continue delivering at the same level while working from home, dealing with additional stress of living through a global pandemic and everything that came with that. For many young women, additional caregiving responsibilities, especially with closure of schools and nurseries, and also absorbing workloads of staff that was furloughed was challenging for many young women that we spoke with. 1 in 3 young women did not feel that they received support to aid their personal development through training, work shadowing, and mentoring opportunities. Many young women also told us that COVID-19 pandemic actually put them in a more precarious position of not feeling able to ask for personal development opportunities while their job might be on the line, and training and mentoring not being prioritized at this time, while the workplace was focusing on the response to the pandemic. And that was especially exasperated for young women who entered the workplace for the first time, and they didn't have those mentoring opportunities, and just not being even able to have, you know, those conversations that you would have with your coworkers when you're making a cup of tea, and you will be learning by being able to speak with other people in a less sort of structured way, and that was removed completely by the pandemic. Respondents also spoke about being underpaid and being given additional responsibilities without training or pay rise. And a final quote that I wanted to share with you before passing over to Rhianna is from a young woman who talked about not having access to training opportunities. My work never provided me with proper training. Any concerns I have had about my lack of shifts have been dismissed. I have often been underpaid. I have been in situations that have made me uncomfortable, working in situations I didn't like. And when I expressed this to my boss, she wasn't so nice about it and did nothing to improve the situation.
Very rough. Yeah, we also wanted to understand how young women felt in the workplace. So as well as what the opportunities were and the barriers were, we wanted to understand what it actually felt like to be in work as well. And, you know, if that had changed or what the experiences were over the last year. And I think one thing that I just need to keep reminding myself of is that everything we're saying is what people have experienced very recently. So I think it's just worth bearing that in mind when we're talking through this too. One positive was that on the whole, respondents to the survey usually or sometimes felt valued or respected at work. That's not always, but it's sometimes. So that's something to draw positive from, I think. The stats that are coming next kind of contradict that. And I think this chapter actually had some of the more impactful statistics that were drawn from the research. The first one that struck me was that 90% of young women who responded to the survey had experienced imposter syndrome at work. So that's nearly everyone who responded to the survey. So that's feeling doubtful of yourself or fear of not living up to other people's expectations of you, feeling like you don't deserve your job. I find that quite shocking, but then when I thought about it as well, most of the young women I know have experienced this. Most of the young women that I speak to have experienced this feeling. So that speaks to like a really concerning cultural issue that we have that we might need to think about. Feeling undermined and undervalued, to experiencing bullying and harassment. Women shared experiences of being held back, made to feel unsafe, and made to feel less confident at work, which all contributed to that big statistic. 44% of young women who responded to the survey had experienced harassment or bullying at work. People shared experiences of microaggressions, manipulation and gaslighting, being undermined, to sexual harassment as well, racism and ageism. So that's all really pretty shocking and awful experiences there that have been shared with us. We didn't sort of include any specific examples, but those were the kinds of themes that came through from the experiences that people shared. 38% of women didn't feel that they were paid fairly for their work. So they noted gaps between themselves and their male counterparts at work, sort of knowing what their colleagues were being paid and knowing that they were being paid significantly less. People also discussed the societal issues that, you know, women are still sort of encouraged to take on more feminine roles, which are more likely to be paid less than more masculine roles. And so that by nature, women are obviously paid less. Obviously, people who've taken time off for maternity leave or other reasons that you might need to take time off work too, are feeling like they've been held back, and so haven't been promoted as quickly, contributing to lower salaries as well. From that, 53% didn't feel confident to negotiate a contract or working arrangements. So this is, again, just points to a massive lack of confidence to sort of know what you're entitled to feel like you deserve a fair salary, to feel like you deserve fair working arrangements, to feel like you deserve, just to be treated like a human being at work. So that was pretty shocking as well. And that sort of also contributed to not being able to feel confident thinking about moving up in the workplace too. A third of women didn't feel able to apply for progression opportunities. So, if they saw a promotional opportunity, didn't feel that they could go for it. A quote here to kind of summarize that theme I thought was pretty powerful was that I have been in my job for nearly 2 years and have never received any training out with my induction, while all my male peers have had thousands spent on them in the form of training courses, equipment, and software to make their jobs easier. I do not receive an annual appraisal, the same as my male colleagues. So yeah, if that's the kind of case, then no wonder that women don't feel confident to negotiate a contract or apply for a progression opportunity. That's a whistle-stop tour of that chapter. I'm going to move on to the next one because I'm aware of time. And this one is a bit more positive. This one is what young women feel needs to change to be able to access work. So thinking about entering the labour market, thinking of young women, teenage sort of girls or women at the beginning of their careers, what is needed to encourage them to feel able to apply for the job that they want. And also when in a career or in a job, what is needed to encourage women to go for, or to change careers, to sort of make it a more equal society, to understand how women want to actually work. So the main thing, as Patrycja outlined at the beginning, was flexibility. So enabling women with sort of different circumstances and different responsibilities to feel that they could apply for jobs. A lot of women came through and told us that they would love to work in a career that required them to, dedicate 40 hours a week in an office, but that just was never going to be possible for them. Women who wanted to travel to go to university, but because of caring responsibilities, they weren't going to be able to do that. It's about adapting the workplace to suit people's lives, which are not the way that the workplace is currently designed. That was 100% the main thing that came through from what needed to change to enable women to access work. It's literally access. Education and training was another big one. This came through mostly about confidence building. I think a lot of the stats we've shared tonight have come down to the fact that women just don't have the confidence to apply for the opportunities that are there, to negotiate the working arrangements that they want to have, and that there's just a severe sort of lack of confidence. Where does this come from? Obviously, the patriarchy, but how do we change that? Education. So it's about sort of fostering confidence building into educational settings. So thinking about building it actually into the curriculum, building skills, training into the curriculum, and thinking about actually applying that as part of sort of, thinking about career advice in school, and why are young girls not actually given a specific sort of part of that, which is about confidence building. So those were the kinds of suggestions that were coming through. Also more sort of focused interviewing and job application training for young women and women from marginalised backgrounds or women from different socioeconomic backgrounds. This is, 100% something that needs focus on, and will be part of the commitments that we talk about in a bit. Changes to the application process was another big one. There's a nice quote here that I think summarises it beautifully for me. Traditional interviews are outdated and suited to a specific personality and learning style. There also should be diverse recruitment panels to reflect the job. If it's a job working with young people should be on the panel. Yeah, I completely agree with that. A lot of application processes aren't accessible. So, it might be quite a complex form that needs filled out. It might be, an interview over Zoom, which for many people doesn't work. Some people might have hearing difficulties and need subtitling. some people might need support work with them. You know, traditional ways of interviewing don't work, and actually people should have more sort of person-centered application styles. So that was a big one. And then also anonymous application processes so that we can challenge unconscious bias. I think that it's pretty evident that that still exists. A lot of young women, especially from the disability group that we had, spoke of feeling like if they were honest in their application forms or application processes, that they wouldn't actually be given an interview. So there needs to be anonymous application processes. Having more role models in positions of power. So basically we need to just be promoting more women and more women from different backgrounds into positions of power. So ones that people who actually represent our population. So people from different or diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, people from different ethnic minority groups, people with disabilities, all need to be promoted so that we can see that they exist and are able to hold leadership positions to encourage others to come through. And then this is the one I love, because it's kind of like, we actually just need to overhaul capitalism and the power structures that keep women in lower paid positions and in lesser valued employment. So that's, I feel like, pretty achievable in the next year. No, just kidding, but also I think we should do that. I think, substantial culture change was something that young women talked a lot of. Sort of changing what we consider to be employable skills, because quite often those are quite masculine, the skills that we think of, you know, and we're thinking about the gender binary, they're quite masculine skills, you know, competitive or determined. We need to actually revalue what we think of as an employable skill. So empathy and being caring and sensitive is actually something that makes you a super amazing employee. We need to change what we value in employment. We obviously need to make it more inclusive to people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people from working class communities who don't have connections. You know, you're thinking about like internships and work opportunities. Often it's people who've got connections through family means who get those before people from different backgrounds. So creating training opportunities and work experience opportunities for people from all different kinds of backgrounds, with less of a focus as well on higher education in employment. Not everyone can get to uni because of many different reasons. We need to focus on other ways of gaining experiences and putting value on those. I think that was a summary of what people think needs to change to enable young women to access work. So I'll pass over to
me. Hi, okay. So I'm going to talk very quickly, because just aware of the time, about chapter 5, which is what needs to change for all young women in Scotland to be better supported in work. And that's obviously other than completely overhauling capitalism and the patriarchy. So there were a few kind of headings in this. So we're all having these conversations about how we build back better. And I don't know about you, but I think I'm almost sick of that phrase already, but I don't think we've heard the last of it yet. So we hope that kind of these recommendations that we're talking about now will kind of form building blocks for new approaches and more inclusive workplaces. So the first one is investing in robust support systems for more inclusive workplaces. So these are kind of seen as key factors to improve young women's experiences. So looking at mentorships, but also looking at the policies that you have in your workplaces. So zero tolerance policies for sexual harassment and sexism, and mandatory training to stop that kind of behaviour. Young women spoke a lot about the kind of casual misogyny and ageism that they experience in the workplace. So looking at, you know, rooting that out. You know, young women often feel that like men were less likely, men were less likely in the workplace to kind of listen to them and take their views seriously. So it was really important that sort of men in powerful positions are made kind of aware of the unequal power dynamics and sort of do the work to be better, basically. A big thing that we looked at as well was mental health support. So Patrycja spoke about mental health support earlier, and so looking at there being improved education about mental health and better provisions for employees. A lot of the people who took the survey didn't feel that there was sufficient understanding of mental health issues and the impacts that they have. on members of the workforce, and that employers should put more time and resources into training for staff members, especially those in more senior positions. There was also discussions on this, that women kind of being gender stereotyped as being too emotional or too sensitive when they discuss their mental health openly. So sort of smashing that stigma, and that is a double-sided thing, because we obviously want to encourage more men to discuss their mental health problems. And so that is something that will make a better workplace and world for everyone. Next is having a greater understanding of caring responsibilities and provision to support these. So this comes into flexible working again, so looking at the hours that people are working, looking at training opportunities, having childcare options, having good maternity leave, having options that are actually affordable, so women can stay in work but also not miss out on raising their child, and not miss out on doing things due to the cost of childcare. We also slightly suggest that there could be an entire culture change around how we kind of view caring responsibilities, and so also looking at having more paternity leave, all of these things, all of these good things. Normalization of different working patterns, so those who are working part-time or who have more flexibility often said that there was like a stigma attached to their arrangements, where people thought that they didn't work hard enough or they didn't have enough ambition, which is obviously not the case. And so just asking that employers are more open to understand why people choose to work this way. So this could obviously be down to caring responsibilities, it could be due to health reasons, and just ensuring that you have a variety of different working patterns available. And what young women also wanted to see higher wages for women and more personal development opportunities. And just one thing to note here is job adverts often have very little information on them, especially regarding pay. And we think and thoroughly recommend that adverts have to be more transparent, because applications for jobs are very time consuming. And if the contract and the pay is not viable for that person, then they're just wasting their time. So if you're as transparent as possible in your advert, I think you'll actually get more applications. So please stop being the people that say that the salary is competitive, or you can just tell us your salary expectations. No, please say what you have available. Young women need to know what they're applying for, so they can make sure that the work fits into their life. And then finally, in this kind of like what we can do, look at employment protections to ensure a just and fair workplace. So all about the unions, join a trade union, have an increase in trade union membership, link your organisation with a trade union. It was kind of felt like being in a union made young women feel more safe in the workplace and gave them the confidence to kind of tackle issues through those channels. But also young women in Scotland wanted to see an end to 0-hour contracts. And it was also felt that some HR departments often don't have a good grasp on equality at work, and so there needs to be work doing on like annual courses and reviews on what equal opportunities actually means, and what gender balanced hiring practice actually mean today, and not perhaps a course that was attended 5-10 years ago. And this was also applied to organisations that don't have HR departments, so suggested that all employees should be participating in training around equal opportunities. And one more thing that people kind of mentioned was that in a lot of workplaces there was this culture of a boys' club where socialising wasn't very suitable for young women. So socialising that was outside of hours was always revolved around alcohol. These aren't inclusive cultures. These aren't cultures that foster good working relationships. So looking at socialising and training within work hours and not asking people to take time out of their lives to do so. And now I'm going to quickly pass over to Patrycja, who's going to talk about our commitments. So please start putting your questions in the chat now, and then we'll come back to them at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Elena. Can you all hear me now? I unmuted early, just in anticipation of this. So we just gave you like a really quick tour of status. And obviously, if you want to find out more and you haven't read the report yet, it's available on our website. Maybe Elena can put a link to that in the chat box as well. But yeah, this year's discussions have highlighted different ways that young women in Scotland experience inequality in the workplace and how that impacts on their health, well-being, family life, career prospects, and lifelong financial security. And the COVID-19 pandemic really exacerbated these inequalities. So young women who are in precarious work felt disposable and unsupported. Young women with caring responsibilities struggled with having to juggle it all without recognition or support. Young disabled women were putting their lives at risk, literally, by still going to work. Mental health and general well-being suffered and was not supported at work. And of course, this hardship will continue beyond this immediate crisis, and young women will continue facing multiple challenges, including rising unemployment, potential difficulties to access flexible work, and yeah, economic crisis that is heading our way, most likely. So as an organization, we committed to 5 actions to challenge that. And these are: we will continue providing leadership training to young women through our Young Women Lead program, and we are committed to supporting every participant to take up a decision-making role within the voluntary, public, or private sector to build a legacy of young women and board, volunteer, and paid leadership positions across every region of Scotland. So young women's voices are actually visible and represented in decision-making. We will deliver a bespoke feminist leadership training to equip young women in Scotland with knowledge and tools that will cultivate feminist principles in decision-making and influential positions across workforce. We will provide a safe space for young women to build confidence and networks. We will roll out a new online well-being and employability support service for young women to help them identify their strengths, build leadership skills, build confidence, build resilience, and strong mental health, and take steps towards employment or training. As we discussed earlier, flexibility and better work-life balance were one of the key factors identified by young women in Scotland to create workplaces where they can thrive. And we as an organization are committed to leading in this field. And from July this year, we transitioned to a 4-day week. Without any pay cuts or any kind of losing of any benefits like annual leave or anything like that. We committed to a full day, real 4-day week. And that also applies to our part-time staff, which are now working 80% of their agreed hours. And we will share our journey and any challenges that we come across, and we'll be really transparent in that, and we'll help and support other organizations to consider 4-day week as a new way of working. And finally, platforming the voices of young women across Scotland to share experiences and engender tangible culture change is vital to ensure change makers include the rich expertise and creative solutions young women offer. We are committed to delivering an ongoing communication strategy focused on empowering young women to advocate for change to their work experiences, workplaces, and industries. And this will commence with our digital campaign, Our Work Counts, which we are launching this Monday. So watch this space. We are at Young Women Scot on all social media platforms. And this will be supported further by our communications work and events going forward. So we'll now open up, we still have a couple more minutes. So we'll open up to questions before we will ask you to share your personal commitments or commitments as an employer or an employee to support young women in the workplace. So pass over to Elena as a chair.
Yeah, so there actually haven't been any questions. I'll just give it a minute in case anyone wants to type in, but you can also feel free to switch your mic off if you'd rather ask than type.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very aware that we threw a lot of information at all of you. So if you need time to digest it and to look at the reports, you can also tweet us or get in touch with us at hello@ywcascotland.org. Or if any of these things sound like something that you want to do as an organization and you need advice, or you would like to talk with us about how we change to 4-day week, for example, or what sort of leadership training we offer to young women in the workplace, please do get in touch. I think if there aren't,
So I'll read that out while you're reading it. So one of the positives for improving mental health in the workplace with having discussions and transparency around mental health demonstrated by senior staff members. How do you see this changing, given the negative impacts often affect lower ranking positions and those less likely to be able to impact change?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think what young women were really telling us, that they wanted to see this really culture of open conversations around mental health. And they thought one of the ways to do that would be through senior management leading by example in that area. So to actually start removing stigma that many young women still felt exists around mental health, or that sort of culture that we are all struggling with mental health, no one else is taking time off. So why would you, as someone who is maybe more affected, feel comfortable taking time off? And one of the ways to address that was to actually have dedicated mental health days. So there's actually no stigma. Everyone can book it, and everyone is actually encouraged to book those days to look after their mental health. And that hopefully would then kind of trickle down into people being then comfortable taking longer sick leave if they needed it for mental health reasons. Is there anything that anyone wanted to add on that from the panel? Rhianna?
I was just going to say as well, I think it's also about us having the confidence to be honest when we are actually struggling with our mental health. Instead of saying that you've got a stomach cramp, actually just tell your boss, I am feeling really anxious this morning and I can't work. I know that's easier said than done for a lot of people, and it might not feel safe to do that, but if you do feel safe to, I would say if we're in positions where we can, honesty might help to reduce that stigma.
Yeah, absolutely.
Commitments, we're bang on time.
Yeah.
No.
So should we, so if everyone, like obviously this is completely anonymous, but we will capture a snapshot of that, and we will use the commitments that you are now making to help us inform our activity moving forward. So for example, maybe that we will be supporting young women with salary negotiations, and we'll create a series of webinars around that, for example, depending on what you're saying now as your own commitments. Like, I will definitely serve as inspiration. So if we can all go into
the chat, I think, and just type your commitment, and then just press enter, and we'll have them.
It can be small, it can be outside the box, it can be, in the ideal scenario, I would like to do that. There is no judgment whatsoever, and we will really appreciate it if you can share it. And if you think about something else, just tweet it at us. If there's anything that you think about tomorrow or on Monday that you think would be a great change in your workplace, just tweet it at us, and we'll share it as well.
And given that that's just gone, 6 o'clock as well, just thank you so much everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. As we said, you can get in touch with us on social media. We're just at Young Women Scot. And I'm going to stop the recording now, but I hope you all have a wonderful Friday, a wonderful weekend. And when you're ready, please press enter of your commitment. Thank you so much.